Welcome, and thank you everyone for voting for my session for DynamicsCon. This is my first time presenting here, so I really appreciate your support, guys. Thank you again for voting. My session for today is about designing effective forms for a better user experience. This is specific to model-driven apps forms, but the guidelines and the considerations and best practices that I'll be covering are quite generic. So it can be applicable to other types of forms as well. So it can be Canvas apps forms or Power Apps portal forms. Before we go there, let me introduce myself first. My name is Marian Castro, and I'm a senior functional consultant. I've been doing working with dynamic CRM for over a decade now. I've started my dynamics journey back in Singapore when I worked there before I moved into New Zealand. So I now live in New Zealand, but I was born and raised in the Philippines, if you're wondering where this accent came from. So, yeah, so been a decade of experience. So I've seen the evolution of dynamic CRM from its 4.0 on-prem version to what we now know as the Power Platform and or Dynamics 365 first-party applications. So, in that period of time, a lot of things have changed. Microsoft's keep investing on the platform, and we see a lot of improvements in a lot of areas within the platform. But one thing remain constant, and that is form design. We always need to design a form, for our applications. And I feel that sometimes this is an area where it's sometimes overlooked in a project. Sometimes it gets pushed towards the end and not given that priority. But I think that it's one of the area that we need to deliver right for us to get that good user adoption rate and overall success of the project. So, yeah, before I go into the outline, if you have any questions towards while I'm doing the presentation, please type them in the chat window, and hopefully I can answer them towards the end of my session. Right, let's look at our outline for today. So first, I'm gonna go through the design process that we do when we're designing a form, and what are the considerations that we have to make. And then I'm gonna move ahead and what do we consider as a good design, and what are the best practices that we can incorporate when we're designing a form. And then I'm gonna share some tips and tricks. These are tips and tricks that I use as well on my own when I'm doing form design. And then we'll wrap it up, and I'm gonna show you some community developed components, the references for it, and I'll mention some other UI and UX factors that affect the user experience as well. So yeah, let's dig into our design process and considerations. I split this into four stages. So first stage that we have is when we're doing form design. First, of course, we always have to do our analysis. So in this stage, this is where we identify, what are the tables, what are the attributes or columns that we need to design a form for. And aside from that, we also need to define who will be the users that are going to use these forms and what are their roles. So grouping all those users together based on their role in the business. And next, we have to identify, you're designing a form, but what is the goal for this? I think it's quite important to define your goal in the beginning, because as when you go proceed designing the form, at least you can go back to your planning stage and assess whether are you actually meeting that goal. So it's good to have a baseline that you can go back to and do your assessment. And also, next we have the define design guidelines. So, especially if you're part of a big team doing a big project, so it's not, there's going to be a lot of people designing different types of forms, for different tables, entities. So it's really a good idea to define the design guidelines. What layout are you going to use, like sectioning, naming conventions, and all that kind of guidelines. So next we have, in our next stage will be the design stage. So once you have all your, the data that you gathered during the analysis stage, we can use that in our design uh, process. So this is where you get to ask yourself, based on the information that I have, do I need a single or multiple app? Do I need a single or multiple forms? So do the users share the same applications? Do they share the same form? Can we group them all together? Or does it make sense to separate your apps function base, for example? So these are the design considerations that you need to make. Aside from that, we also need to decide whether does it make sense when create form to use a main or a quick create form. So especially on subgrids, when you're creating a record and you only have minimal information in the beginning, it really makes sense to just use the quick create form because it just speeds up the process and allows, saves the user some time with all those clicking and when using the main form. And second to the last, we have the layout tabs and sections. So this is where you define, based on your design guidelines, you design the layout. Are you using one column, two columns, three columns, um, tabs and sections? How do you, naming conventions for all those? Um, so that's where it's really important to have a design guidelines in the beginning and use that in the design process. And lastly, we also need to consider whether the form is going to be used on the mobile device. So not all there are limitations for mobile forms, so you need to be aware of that not all scripts that would work on the main form on the desktop application is going to work on the mobile device. So we need to know the limitations and consider your design based on the mobile limitations. So some of the ways that you can work around this is you can group together sections that you could group together attributes in a section and hide that section for mobile for the mobile. So in the section, there's a setting there to say hide this on the mobile, or you could create a completely separate mobile form and control that using security roles. So once we have the design, so we've done the analysis, we've done the design, we now need to do the prototyping and review the design with the users. So there's a few ways of how you can do the prototype. I think the most common is creating it directly in the dev environment, do minimal form design just to give the user the look and feel and explain to them how things works. Or if you prefer to use a prototyping tool, that's also a good way of doing that. And lastly, the good old Excel spreadsheet way of presenting something to stakeholders. So personally, I like to do just doing it in the dev environment and showing it to the users and then gathering their feedback and making some adjustments um, when doing the prototyping. And then lastly, so once you've done the analysis, you've done the design, sorry, you've done the review, you can then now finalize and seek the design approval and finalize the configuration in the system. All right, if you have any questions on this slide, feel free to pop them in the chat window, and I'll answer them towards the end of the session. So good design and best practices. What do we consider a good design? So while I was doing this research, I came across an article on about how Expedia lost $12 million because of an extra field on their payment form. So what happened was on their payment form, you have on the credit card details, you have your name, and then there was an optional field called company, and then the address fields. Now the users, when filling up that form, they would put in their name, and then when it came to the company field, they would thought that it was asking for the bank's name. So they would put in the bank, and then on the address, they put in the address of the bank instead of their personal address. So when the credit card is processed, it gets declined because it's looking at the address. The address was wrong because they put in the company's address instead of their own personal address. So that cost them, $12 million because of that optional field. But so it just showed that good design and good structure really pays off. And that example might not be 100% related to us because that's a front end form, but you get the idea. It's doing a good design and the best practices in the end um, will help you with your whatever you want to achieve with your form. Right. So I wanted to make this a little bit more interesting. So I came up with my 10 commandments of a good form design. So let's have a look. What are they? So my first commandment is thou shalt provide clear and descriptive labels. I know in our model driven app form, it's quite limited of the label that we can put on the field. So I think the best way of doing this is give a concise descriptive wording that when users see it, they know exactly what that field is expecting. And also to be consistent in your labeling. So one example I can give is, for example, dates. So I find that sometimes we name it created on, but we have another field that says date submitted, and then there's another field that say received on. So it will be good to just be consistent, and if you're using created on, then you know be consistent and use that all across your date fields. Right, second one, those shall use the same label and display name. Now this is around when we're creating a field. Initially the field will have the same label and the same display name. But we go our iterations and review it with the users, and sometimes they would want to change the label. And most of the time we change the label, but we forget to change the display name. And so when you're going to the advanced find and on the view, you're not going to be able to see that same field because on the form it's named differently as opposed to the advanced find and the views. So make sure that you use the same name, and if you update the label name as well, add the display name as well. But there are instances sometimes that if you're using a shortened version of the label on the form. So one example will be you have two sections of physical address and postal address, for example, and you just want to say street one, street two, city for both. So you can do that because you in your section you're just gonna put postal address and physical address, and then the fields will just be the shortened form of it. But I would suggest that in your display name you put postal address street one, postal address street two, so that when you're going on advanced find, you know exactly which field um, you need, or it will be described properly in the advanced find and views. Okay, number three, those shall use conditional logic where needed. So this is around showing or hide and show. We normally you do this hide and show on the form. So my logic is, if a field is not needed by the user, it shouldn't be there. So use conditional logic where required, hide those fields that are not necessary for the current logged-in user. Number four, those shall avoid data entry errors. So do validation as much as possible. So for example, you can use the input mask control that's out of the box, available in Dynamics 365. So it allows you to validate formats, for example, phone number, even masking credit card. So it's a really good control to do data validation. So check that out. It's called input mask control. And those shall minimize user input. So this goes along with the conditional logic with our number three. So as much as possible, if it's not required, don't put it there, or to minimize and make the creation of the record faster for the user. And those shall provide consistent layout. So this is one of my favorite, because sometimes you go on different entities tables and you see different layouts. So in one form, for example, my timeline is in the middle of the form. I go to other entities and the timeline is on the left or on a separate tab. So it doesn't give the user the chance to form a habit of knowing where to go when they're on a form. So giving a consistent layout, I think is quite important, because you want the users to think less when they're doing their day-to-day job. So they should it should just become a habit for them to click around, know exactly where they need to go when they need to do something. All right, number seven, those shall demonstrate logical flow. So this is around you know being structured on designing your tabs and your sections and fields. So the form need to align with the business process flow. So when would the information come in hand? When in the process do they need to complete this tab? I mean, this part of the form. So your logic, your tabs, and your section should align with the business process flow. And number eight, those shall group related fields together. I think it's self-explanatory. This is grouping the fields together logically. And number nine, those shall use consistent field type format. I'm talking about, for example, Boolean type of field. So there's four ways of representing that on the form. So you could either use, you know, a radio button, a checkbox, um, a drop down list. And now with the Fluent UI, you can use the toggle as well. So four different types of presenting that, and it will be good to just stick to one as much as possible and be consistent across the application. And last but not the least, those shall update icons of custom tables. If this is not form specific, but this is part of the user experience, I think it's a good idea to update those icons, and it's just make the application look good and professional. So yeah, these are my 10 commandments of good form design. If you have any comments around this, feel free to pop it in, or if you have something to share as well, um, pop it in the chat window as well. Cool. So let's proceed now with our tips and tricks. So I'm just going to share with you guys some of the tips and tricks I personally use when I'm doing form design. Um, this might be, some of them might be common if you've been working on Dynamics for quite some time, but I hope those new ones that have just started, I hope you'll find this useful. Go first on the list is to implement record naming conventions. So every time we create a table, we always have that name field created for us. And that becomes the header of the record. So it describes what the record is. Now, sometimes users wouldn't want to fill that up. So for example, opportunity, they'll be like, why do I need to put a name for the opportunity? Can it just be, the type of opportunity there? Can it be identified by that and by the customer? So what I normally do is create a flow and concatenate a few fields and populate that name automatically so they don't have to provide that, and that saves them time. Number two is use of editable grids. So on a subgrid, I find it really useful if you present that as an editable grid if you can. Reason being is if they don't have to go to the form just to update a status, they can just do it on the field. So especially if, for example, you have 5, 6 records that you need to update one at a single time. You can't be bothered opening each record and updating the status, closing it, and going and opening one up again. So use editable grids, and that lets you edit the record on the grid itself. And I don't have time to demo this today, guys. So if I suggest just Google all these keywords, and there's heaps of articles and posts online that would actually explain how to do this. Another one is the quick view form. So I kind of like to use this to display a summary of related record. So for example, an account, and you have a quick view form of your contact. So make use of that when you're doing custom tables as well. Next, use of table controls. So table controls, these are example of these are like the calendar control. So you can use that if you want, for example, an activity to show as a calendar on the list. So having that as your default, you can still switch and show it as the read only grid view. So, but I think it's quite good to see, on a calendar view, what are your meetings for the day, um, the tasks that are due, and all kind of stuff. Next, one of the use of table control as well is the Kanban board. So I think it's used in the opportunity where you can have a Kanban view of the records and you can just drag and drop to change the status, or the status of the opportunity. Next we have review advanced find fields. So this is to clean up the advanced find list. So because whenever we create a column or a field, the searchable is by default checked or true. So in order for you to clean up the advanced find, you need to set that to false. So untick that, and in the classic solution designer, you can bulk edit the fields. So just select the fields that you want to turn this feature off, and then click edit, and you'll be able to set the searchable to no that way. Next, this is one of my favorite use of relationship field mapping. So when creating a relationship between tables, if you look at the navigation bar of the relationship setting, there is a link there called mapping. So what it do is you can map a field to field mapping between your parent record to your child record. And what it does is it copies the value of those fields to the child record when you're creating it. So instead of you creating a flow to do the copying, the relationship mapping will perfectly work for that purpose. Next one, hide conditional fields by default. Now, remember earlier in one of our good design considerations that, creating a smart forms, if we do business rules to show and hide fields, it is a good idea to hide the field by default. Reason being is if you don't hide it by default, when the form is loaded, the field is loaded as well, and you'd see that flicker of when the business rules kick in, then it hides the field, and so you see that split of a second you see the field and then it disappears. So if you want to avoid that, then hide the field by default. Next is cleanup related tabs links. So I'm talking about the related tab on the form. So whenever we create a relationship, it gets added to that related tab. So if it's a good idea to sort that and make sure that you put the most important type of record at the top and remove the ones that you won't be needing. And next is the use of calculated fields. I kind of like this one as well. So what it does is by doing a calculated field, you can, of course, you can do calculations and stuff, but you can also copy a value from a related record, and that will be updated, and it will sync, or it will just copy real time whatever the value of the field that you're copying from. So these are the 9 tips and tricks that I can share with you today. Hopefully you find that useful and use in your whenever you do design forms. So there, for the references, I'm going to share with you some of the community developed components that I find really useful when I'm doing my form design. And first on the list is from Andrew Butenko. So this is his article on how you can achieve switching the form based on the data on the record. So we can always control, which form to load using security roles. But in this scenario, he's checking a value on the record. So for example, um, if the user is a account manager, I would want to load the partner form. So he uses a certain method on the JavaScript to achieve this one. So have a look at his article and if this is something that you want to do. Next one, we have Amy Holden. Amy did create an article around cleaning up the activity timeline on model-driven apps. So in her article, she showed how to, from before and after, how to clean up all these type of activities that are probably not going to be applicable to the users. So have a look at her article, and she mentioned a lot of other cool stuff in there. Next, we have Lynn Zowin's The Return of Composite Address Control, now with built-in autocomplete functionality. So this used to exist in the legacy web client, and I actually like that functionality because it gives you a concise summary of the address, and but then when you click on it, then you get a structured form where you can enter the address details. But when UCI came, that disappeared, was gone. Um, but now recently it was introduced again in field service, and you can achieve that the same way with other applications by following what Lynn have documented in this article. So have a look at that. It also now have a built-in autocomplete functionality, as you can see here. So that's really cool. Andrew actually also have a PCF control for composite address. You can also check that out in the PCF gallery. Another one again from Andrew. So this one, I quite like this as well. So this is showing a lookup field as an option set using a PCF control. So as an example here, I've got a price list, which is actually a lookup to the price list table. And so I downloaded his control, which is called lookup to option set. Enable that, and then my price list has now become a drop down an option set. So I prefer the option set because it's less click aside from the lookup. But of course, if you have a lot of records in your lookup, you need to find the balance because it's going to be a long list, and just find a balance of which one would actually make sense for your situation. And last one for the references is do review the new features in soon to be deprecated UI components in the Microsoft side. I'm just listing down here the Wave 2 2021 new features that will be coming soon. One of it is the side pane here, which I think is quite cool. Another one is this is called, the form component control. So what it does is it allows you to edit a related record within the parent record's main form. So if I go into so this is the control that you use And as you can see, I'm on the account form, but I'm able to edit a contact form within an account form. So have a look at that control and try it out. And last but not the least is we have the PCF gallery. So have a look in there. There's hundreds of PCF components there that you can use for your form design. So if you can, as you can see, there will be categories that you can select. And this is just one example of a grid, grid category and what's available to download there for you to use. So you even have this colorful option set grid. Quite cool. All right, cool. So we've seen all those references. If you want to share if you have a favorite, community developed component, share it with me as well. Do pop it in the chat window. I'd like to wrap this up by sharing you some other UI and UX factors that I know affects the user experience. And these are the navigation pane, help pages, and form performance. So on the navigation pane, try to avoid the need for users to frequently switch areas. So if you can duplicate the links, if you have, in this example, you have sales and marketing areas, you don't want the marketing people to always go to the sales whenever they needed to access accounts and contacts, for example. So do duplicate that in the marketing area, just so that the users won't be switching frequently to different areas. And another one is help pages. There's an article by Diane Taylor on this, and here she explained how we can enable this and use within the application. So this is what the help page looks like. So you can actually have all those bubbles, create all those bubbles, and create those links whenever, create those links that will be specific to an account form. So it works on a context of where you are. So for example, I'm here in the account form. If I click the help page, it will open up the help page for that account form. If I'm on the dashboard and I click on the help page, it will open up the help page for the dashboard. So it's quite cool. And I think instead of using, Word format user guides or PDF format user guides, I think it's quite cool to have that and to have this here and make it more interactive and easy to access for the users. So if they're doing something on the account, for example, and they forgot the steps on how to do, what to do, what are the information to provide, they can just click on here and open the help file. Oops, sorry. And so how you enable that is on the system settings. So enable custom help pane, and then when you click on this, it will open up this page here. And how you edit this is, you click on here, edit this, and you'll be able to add in, a list of different stuff. So you can have a list view, numbering. This is the balloon. This is what you can do, and point onto a control and see what they can do for that control. It doesn't show here, but you can also add in image, so images and videos. So if you have a video of, how to create an account, for example, so you can embed that in here and it's more interactive. Also optimizing the form load. So Microsoft have a article on how you can optimize the loading of the form. So these are all the things that you can do. Keep the number fields to a minimum. This is setting the visibility option, so hiding that field. For the scripts, you can avoid synchronous requests and use collapsed tabs to defer loading web resources. So those are just some of the examples. So head on to that article to view the complete list. And last but not the least, I'd like to encourage you to vote for this idea. This is, as I mentioned earlier, setting the label field, bringing back what was what disappeared from the legacy client. So before we're able to adjust the width of the label, but now we don't have that capability, that ability to set that in the UCI. So if you share my sentiments, do go here on the voting page and please vote. That's all I have for you today, guys. I hope that you learned something from my presentations, and I'd like to thank the Dynamics Con organizers for giving me this opportunity to share something with you. And if you have any questions, I'll be in the live Q&A and do interact with me there, and I'll see you there. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Just going through the questions. Hope my presentation, you learned something from it. And I've seen a few of you giving feedbacks, positive feedbacks. So thank you so much. That encourages me to do more. We have a question from Geoff earlier. Have you developed a guidelines document or something similar that you share internally? To be honest, I haven't seen a design guideline specific document running around in a project. But what we do, sometimes it's mostly verbal agreement between team members, because as Ilona mentioned earlier as well, that it only gets tricky when there are more than one hand that is doing a form design or configuring some forms. So it's always, I think the design guidelines will really help to make the team design form consistently. What we do normally is just verbal agreement, and in the requirements document we just specify that, but there's nothing like a specific design guideline that I've seen so far. Is there more any question? Thank you to Sebastian for joining.
Hey,
so
Marianne.
The slides will be available next week, as Heidi mentioned, and I think I put the reference links there, but I'll enter it in the chat window as well for you guys to see. Hello there, Rami.
How's it going? It was a fantastic session. I really enjoyed it.
I can't hear you.
Oh, you're having issues hearing me? Can you hear me now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Seems to having issues. Can you hear me now?
Hold on. Hi, Rami. Do you have any more question?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right. Awesome. I actually did have a few questions. So I was saying it was an awesome presentation, and with sort of live. There was a talk about sort of doing some data reports and understanding how users behave on the form. How can you get that feedback, be it sort of from the users, or even if there is a tool that will help you generate maybe the number of clicks or having a look at how people move around the forms to optimize that over time.
Yes. So that report that Geoff mentioned, it tells you how frequently a field is used.
Mm-hmm.
So we can use that to determine whether do we need this field on the form, given we only have very small real estate to work at. So that will help you to simplify the form further. And yeah, with regards to getting feedback, usually in a project, we assign if not a product owner, someone that the users can up a single point of contact for the users to give their feedbacks to, and then we can collect all those feedbacks, give priority in terms of do we want to do this, and um, assess whether that's something that we can do within that iteration of the project.
Yeah, having a product owner is usually very powerful and essential to the success of the project, and they usually give you that feedback coming straight from the users themselves. I think there was a comment from Ilona saying that it's usually good to have a study halfway through the project just to get that feedback on whether you're heading the right direction or not, rather than doing it at the end, or rather than getting a some co-worker just giving you a little bit of feedback. It's always best to get it from the
Yes.
business itself.
Yes, I agree. And surveys will really help. Get a survey from the users themselves, and it's always they need some time to use the form, get used to the form, and um, provide their feedback. And
Absolutely.
based on that, yeah.
I usually say when I get feedback, constructive feedback on my system, and people say, oh, this is not working. I say this is a positive sign because that means they're using it and they're
They're
looking at
using
ways of
it.
improving it. If you get no feedback at all, that means that either you're brilliant or that people are not using it at all. So
Yes.
feedback is good. Feedback is good. Hey, during the presentation, you talked about PCF controls. Do you have a favorite one that you've used in the past?
Um, yeah, there were a few, but I haven't used this one, but I've seen this one PCF control developed by the PCF lady herself, Diana Berkelback. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's called Colorful Option Set Grid. Um, I like it because it gives you the ability to provide icons on the listing or provide colors. So it's kind of very attractive in terms of getting getting definition on the form, like setting your status as different color and something like that. So that's one of my
Yeah,
favorite.
I think it helps a lot. Adding colors definitely brings the forms to life and
Yes,
helps you
even
with sort of eye
icons.
coordination. That's correct.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
The
Um, I,
green.
w- I, I was hoping that you would say it's one of my controls, but apparently it's not. But that's okay. That's
I
okay.
don't want to be biased, Rami.
All
No,
right. Okay.
just kidding.
So when you're doing your design workshops, how do you sort of tackle the form design tasks specifically? What is the process that you follow in the sessions?
So yes, so when doing the workshop, because you have different roles, different type of users that will be using the form, so it's always good to get at least one representative for each persona, and you always, it helps to get into that persona and say, okay, do the form provide what I need to perform as this user, and get the user to also try it themselves.
Okay. And how do you handle feedback when someone tells you that they don't like the form or they don't think it works? Which camp are you? Are you like Henry Ford, where you can get the car in any color as long as it's black, or do you take that feedback, you work on it? And I think one of the challenges that I find is if I don't agree with the feedback, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, you have to be logical and see what's the reasoning behind with it. Yeah,
Okay, so you take it on a case by case basis, and
case
then
by
you
case.
You study it. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And I really liked when you said that they should have exactly the number of fields that they need on the form. So basically, I think you're following the logic of less is more. So if there's a field that
Yes.
is not really used a lot, then
With
don't put it on the form. And also to group fields that are related together. I really like that suggestion in here. Do you usually try and count the number of clicks to go through a business process just to make sure that it's sort of optimized to its best?
Yes, yes, as much as possible, less click,
Okay.
especially with the users wanting to do more in less time.
Okay.
I think we have a few seconds left, so thank you everyone to who joined my session, and I hope you got something valuable from this. And yeah, I'll see you around, guys. Thank you, Rami.
Thank you.